Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're just in advance of our second presentation of the day here. I'd like to introduce our next two presenters. Alison Heath is an adult educator, link instructor, and curriculum developer with over 20 years of experience creating learning programs locally, provincially, and nationally. She has developed curriculum on a variety of topics, including heart health, women's midlife health, gender equality, and leadership development for both the EAL and general population. And her co-presenter, Astrid has enjoyed a rich and varied career, assuming a number of different teaching and administrative roles, including link instructor, PBLA lead teacher, and now an instructional developer at MOSAIC, where she is currently continuing to support new staff. So welcome both. Feel free to get started whenever you're comfortable.
Great. Thank you so much, Whitney, for that welcome. A pleasure to be here today. It's exciting to be engaged in thinking and conversation and listening about innovations in e-learning in this sector. It's just really important work that we're doing right now for learners that need it and all the changes that are taking place in the learning environment. So Astrid and I are going to be co-presenting this presentation for you today. We'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement because we're coming from British Columbia. And in particular, we'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. This includes the Squamish, Stolo, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And perhaps in the chat, people can include where they are situated today in terms of what land they are on. People can share where they are. Yeah, we got it. Oh, there we go. Treaty 7 lands. Thank you. Treaty 7. Thank you. Coming from other places. Beautiful. Treaty 1. Lovely. So let's just monitor the chat and notice where other people are coming from today as we're listening in. So as we go forward in this presentation, as Whitney said, I'm going to be co-presenting with my colleague Astrid, who I have the pleasure of working with at MOSAIC. MOSAIC as an organization provides settlement, language, employment support for newcomers to Canada. I'm delighted to work with MOSAIC. I've been with MOSAIC a number of years. As a link instructor, I'm currently the manager of the Brentwood Language Program and Surrey Link Program, which includes a combination of blended and remote programs currently, where previously we had in-person and blended. Now we have a new combination as a result of the pandemic. So as we begin to think about this presentation on innovation and not-for-profit, Astrid and I were doing some thinking about what really is the heart of our work. And we really feel that the heart of our work is situated strongly in the combination of considering the complex life world of adult learners and meaningful real-world tasks. That's the center of the work that we do. And it's from that place that the innovation occurs. It's not from the technology itself. It's about thinking about the real life world of adults and all the complexity and challenges that they're dealing with. And how is it that we can support them to navigate the tasks that they're encountering in the settlement experience with real world tasks in the learning environment that are relevant and meaningful and allow them to thrive. So when we think about those things and we think about technology, we think about how is the digital shift that's happened through the pandemic impacting the life world and therefore the real world tasks that need to happen in the learning environment. So with the digital shift, it's not that we haven't had the technology before the pandemic. MOSAIC, in fact, had an online classroom as early as 2009, when it was first exploring employment and workplace programs. We had a hybrid program that was taking place, but like so many people, the significant digital shift happened in the pandemic because of us needing to do our work differently as a result of the public health concerns. So in some cases, we were creating new pathways. Maybe in other cases, there were already some highways well established. And I believe that we're still actually creating new pathways. And one of the pathways that I think we've been developing, certainly at MOSAIC, is we've been looking very closely at what are the needs for learners at a literacy level or those lower levels of link where they're first entering into a digital space and the learning environment, or literacy learners who are progressing through the levels of link. And as we know, many learners with literacy challenges, the literacy gaps are not closed as somebody exits out of link 1 or link 2. They can continue to face literacy challenges throughout their learning journey. So I put this picture up, and I'm going to ask everybody to maybe comment in the chat to identify a shift that you've noticed during the pandemic that, maybe created a bit of a challenge for you or for your clients. We were laughing yesterday as we were trying to do a preparation for presentations, and if you're going between Teams and Zoom or Zoom and Teams, all the buttons are in different places. And even though you may be well versed with that technology, your brain has to do the switch to remember, where's my screen situated? Where are the buttons? Where's my leave the room? And so to make sure you're not exiting suddenly because you've got a different orientation of things. So when I look in the chat, we've got a few things that people are saying. Instructors making online instead of paper, more expectations on learners regarding digital literacy. Everyone is now a digital navigator on top of language and systems navigators. Student proficiency with cell phones rather than laptops. Yeah, these are all really important points. And they bring attention to the whole idea that not everybody is zooming down a high-speed digital highway. They're navigating and traversing language challenges alongside the challenges of working in the digital space. So when we think about innovations that are happening for the digital shift, there's 5 particular innovations that we want to talk about today. One of them is planning for the support with digital literacy skills development. As somebody mentioned in the chat, people are dealing with the combination of language literacy alongside digital skills development. Consideration of cognitive load research in terms of e-learning for literacy learners, so weaving in what we know about the brain and science of learning. Curated collections of CLB-aligned multimodal learning objectives, and the previous presenter, Linda, did a beautiful job talking about the importance of curating good resources. Intentionally incorporating authentic digitized resources into e-learning across the CLBs with a sense of the scope and sequence of things as somebody progresses through the link levels, and integrating complex topics for stage 2 learners as learners advance in both their language and digital skills to ensure that the content is enriching and meaningful. So I'd like to begin with the first piece about digital learning. It sounds like there's lots of great work that's been happening through TIES. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we think about with the digital shift and innovation, that it's not just about what might be happening in the classroom with a learning object or just with the digital skills support in gaining digital literacy skills. It's about planning for everything that needs to happen. So what people resources are needed for instructional support, what innovations can happen there, from adding in classroom assistants to volunteers, thinking about material resources for instruction, both online and manipulative, hardware, software resources for digital access, and ongoing monitoring of digital needs with the changing technology. Somebody mentioned to begin with about, a phone that now is 10 years old and it's not going to accept text. We know that the technology is changing constantly, and we also know that there's a social economic factor that needs to be considered. I was thinking of an experience the other day where I went to a store and they were asking me about whether I wanted the app. And I thought about this question that it's not that simple, because me being able to make that choice about getting the app is dependent on, do I have a phone that is functional, that it has enough storage to store that app? Can I afford the phone that can store that app? Can I actually afford the Wi-Fi access in that moment to be able to download that app? And do I have the skills to be able to understand what features of the app I want to make use of in the moment? So there's lots of complexity that we need to think about with the use of digital technology. And part of being innovative is about being mindful of all these pieces. And again, coming back to the root of what we do, which is, what is the adult life world and what are the real world tasks that learners are working with? So one of the projects that MOSAIC has been involved in is something called the Digital Services Gap Project. And in this particular project, we are trying to take a look at where is that gap between creating a new GOAT path for digital literacy skills and the high-speed digital highway. So we created a range of resources that for the learner included learner's instructions that were translated in multiple languages, a learner's dictionary, and how-to videos. But in addition to that, we knew that there were things that the teacher or classroom assistant, instructional support person needed. So training materials were created, introductory resources and videos, learner needs assessment, module overviews, tip sheets for supporting specific tech tasks. Now, I just want to applaud the team at MOSAIC that was involved in doing this. We have some incredibly passionate people, very skilled in their work. And we started out with a list of 20 different things that we're going to be focused on. By the time the project was done, there were over 120 different resource pieces that were developed. We have some co-presenters that will be presenting at TESOL, Ontario, that will be talking more about this work. So I encourage all of you to take a look at that presentation if you have the opportunity to, and learn more about what resources are available, some of which will be available through the MOSAIC website. So it's out there and will be publicly available for others to make use of. So I think this is another part of innovation where we can share across the provincial territorial boundaries, that all of us, look at us here today. In the past, it was much more expensive. It was more difficult to think about doing these conferences that brought people together from many different geographic places. Now it's much easier for us to do that. So moving to the adult life world in the classroom, it's complex. Our learners are coming into the classroom facing a whole range of different challenges. Adults are not children. They have care responsibilities for young children, perhaps aging parents, perhaps they themselves are dealing with health challenges. They have perhaps accessibility challenges. They're dealing with everyday life activities, from banking to shopping to housing, and they may be coming into the classroom with a trauma history. And all of these things can make the learning tasks more challenging. And we believe part of innovation is being mindful of the complexity of challenges that our learners are facing, not to be wowed by all of the technological tools and to lose sight of the real human lives that are interacting with this technology. So one of the innovations that we've been working with is this idea of cognitive load theory, which is not a new theory. It's been around in the field of education for some time, education and psychology for some time. The theory of cognitive load talks about how the brain learns and stores knowledge. It acknowledges that we process information in small pieces and small chunks. So we recognize that learners are learning differently depending on the cognitive load that they're experiencing in the learning environment. There are complex differences between literacy learners, depending on the formative education access that they had. Literacy learners are managing a whole range of learning tasks. Some of them may be the challenges related to physical motor dexterity, because perhaps they didn't have access to writing tools. They're just learning to work with the manipulation of digital devices. So learning tasks can be complex for the literacy learners. Anybody who's coming with trauma, limited access, or interrupted access to education increases the cognitive load for literacy and low-level learners substantially. And again, this is about how can we innovate in a way that recognizes and respects this complexity. So assume that learners are under high cognitive load when they enter the learning environment. Linda talked about how distracting some websites can be with ads and pop-ups. So all of these things can increase the cognitive load, prevent people from actually accessing the language learning task because the brain is trying to filter out what's important from unimportant. So it's really important to simplify instructions for improved focus, reduce unnecessary load, and manage the sensory stimulus, making sure it's really clear what is the language learning task. Try to curate the activities so a learner doesn't have to navigate any pop-ups, ads, commercials, things that will take them away from the language learning. When people are thinking about designing the actual learning activities, learning objects, think about explicitly presenting the vocabulary and the grammar. Connect and integrate images with the language. Remove any redundant information and chunk information into manageable units. Now, we're all learners here, and we've all had experiences in the classroom ourselves. And of course, there was a steep learning curve for everybody as we entered the pandemic. I wonder if everybody can share in the chat, if they can think of a moment where you have experienced high cognitive load, that too much information experience. What was it? What was it when you were in the digital space that was just too much? Was it the color? Was it the navigation on the page? Was it the ads? Can you give examples of an experience you've had where you've noticed being under too much cognitive load in the digital space? Anybody, or maybe there's so much cognitive load that people can't type right now. Oh, added music and pop-ups. Yes. Good example. Music coming up. Chaotic layout of a learning management system. Excellent. Again, thinking about the learner in mind. How are they receiving that information? When it's chaotic, nobody's really thought about how is that information, how is somebody going to intake that information? Too many ideas on a PowerPoint, 3-hour Zoom class, too many learning management drop-down menus. Beginning of the pandemic, we hadn't learned how many breaks were necessary. So sessions could be quite long and draining. Excellent example, right? Too much stuff on a website, too many colors. You've all given excellent examples of where we start to experience cognitive load. So here we are, we're in this space, considering that we may all here have high literacy levels, high levels of digital literacy skills. Imagine the learner coming into the digital space with lower literacy skills, lower language skills, how overwhelming that could be. Now, our belief is that we shouldn't ignore the needs of literacy learners and just dismiss that it's not possible for lower level learners in the CLBs, CLB 1, 2, 3, or literacy, pre-literacy learners to not have any access to the digital space. Our belief is if we give consideration to design, we can help to make it more accessible for these learners, and that we have a responsibility to, because our world has shifted. There are so many things now that you must be able to do in the digital space. Book a blood test, book a doctor's appointment, do online banking. If you want to go to a movie, order a movie ticket. There are so many things that if we do not provide the opportunity for learners to gain the digital skills while they're learning language, that we're doing a disservice to our learners. So what we'd like to do is just discuss some design considerations that need to be factored in. Now, there's a beautiful resource called ESL for All, which recognizes the needs of adult literacy learners. There's some beautiful recommendations in that resource, but it particularly pertains to print-based materials. So we've looked at it closely to say, okay, what does that mean when we translate that in to the digital space? So one of the things is font size. We need to really think about what is the visibility and accessibility of the font size. And as you can see here, as we go higher, it becomes more clear and easy to read when we go beyond words 20.20 and above. All right. On a print page, maybe 14 is okay. But as we can see on the computer, depending on the size of the screen that you have, larger is better. Color makes a big difference. Somebody mentioned that about, choosing the background and think about too many colors. It's also important to think about the specific colors that you're using for accessibility, and also how you're using color to reinforce any structure or skill cueing. So many of our teachers in the classroom will use a specific color, maybe red are verbs, cueing that there's an action involved in the task. Blue is a heading, or red for homework. But as you can see, certain colors, there is not high contrast. There are some people who are colorblind, can't make the distinction between certain colors. So we do need to use color mindfully. Contrast is particularly important. Minimal accessible ratio is 4:1. Black to white is 21:1. And as you can see, when you start to use colors like yellow, orange, green, there just is not as much contrast as we move into colors like blue and red and black. Another important design consideration is the use of white space. When we're trying to reduce the cognitive load, we're trying to reduce redundant information. So when we increase the use of white space around images, create a minimalist design, make sure there's ample divisions between the text and the picture, it makes it immediately more accessible for somebody. Another important design consideration is how we incorporate visuals to align with the text. It's important that language is CLB aligned in the instructional cue, that it's consistent, and that we integrate things like audio to support the text and visuals. Use consistent words and labels. If you're working with an instructional team, that might be something you could meet with the instructional team and everybody could discuss together. What are the symbols that are going to be used to cue people to different learning tasks so that as a learner moves from one level to the next, they are anticipating, they can build essentially the cognitive Velcro for skill cueing, that it's easy for them to move from one task to the other because they've seen the visual symbols previously. They can anticipate it and they have an increased sense of confidence about the skill that will emerge. It's also important to use familiar technology. So again, this is about reinforcing skills, visual symbols that people may be familiar with, watching a video or listening to something, but creating a simple, easy, one-click, one-touch access in which it's very easy for somebody to physically manipulate the task on a screen. We know that learners are using a whole range of different devices, from small touchscreen phones to tablets to laptops, and in some cases, desktops. Some have touchscreen capabilities, others do not. So it's very important to have a good understanding of what tools that your learners may be using.
The book.
Oh, there's
Reading the book.
There's the instructions. Another piece in the design considerations, as I was just speaking about, is thinking about manual dexterity for page navigation and control. That assumes that somebody has touch screen capability. If you're going to have that functionality, you need to make sure it's a 1 or 2 click down, simple scroll up and down, simple swipe left or right, but don't use drag and drop. It's really a much more complex task and requires multiple levels of instruction. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Astrid, who has got years of experience in the linked classroom and also brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the design of learning management systems. So Astrid works with our MOSAIC learning management system, and she sees what's happening across all of our classrooms. We have 3 different locations in Burnaby, Surrey, and Vancouver, across all of the CLBs from literacy through to Link 7. Astrid, I'll pass it over to you.
Do you want to, next slide? So now we're going to look at the application of design principles in a learning management system. And I want to talk about accessibility and device use, the importance of easy to navigate visual design in an LMS. And I want to show some sample learning objects from across the CLBs. As we've said before, I think the previous presenter said, it's really important to think about devices. It's important to gather teacher and student feedback about student device use and how it affects the display and ease of use of learning objects. Here are some of the things that we have learned from our digital support person's feedback. Some H5P objects don't display well on phones. Videos, PDFs, audios, and simple fill-in-the-blanks work well. So do image hotspots and mark the words. If you look at a H5P word search on a cell phone, you sometimes can see the letters dragging around the corner. So be careful about how those display on phones because the words don't remain in a line. On a small phone, the matching games, I have a really small iPhone, and the matching games can go really, really long down the page and only 2 tiles at a time. So I would recommend that students have at least a laptop if they want to fully participate in an online class. I've also heard feedback from our digital support person that course presentations and columns are too complicated for CLB 1 and 2 students. So here are just some general thoughts. I recommend you try learning objects on your phone. I try objects and then try them on lots of different devices. Gather the devices from your friends, around your house, and take a look at how they are working. The visual layout of a class is also important. For example, you can use a tile format class to make your class easier to navigate. You can see the 8 open tiles and the very practical, frequently used topics. The topics are letters, numbers, calendar, time, holidays and festivals, and phonics. The goal here is to foster student learning. A simple format helps students manage tasks and improves learner confidence. The high-use, frequently used language helps students build foundational skills. Also, limit the items within a tile and hide the other objects if they're not being used. Look at the classes from student view and pick important learning objects for self-study. Before we move on, in the chat, can you tell us, in your experience, what learning objects have worked well with lower level learners? Do you have any ideas? Can you put them in the chat? What learning objects work well with lower level learners? What have you tried? Do you have go-to websites? Do you have kind of favorite activities? Any ideas? No ideas? All right. Oh, mark
Sorry,
the words.
Astrid. I just don't want to do self-promotion. I don't want to do self-promotion, so that's why I'm not putting anything in there.
Self-promotion's all good. So don't hesitate. All right. Okay. No problem. Oh, nice. Okay. Good to know. All right. So now we're going to look at the application of design principles to learning objects. Here is a screenshot from a video. Notice the white space, large, easy to read font, and visuals. It is paired with a worksheet with the same vocabulary, and this is an example of less is more. This is an example of objects for Lit or CLB 1 or 2. So I think it's important to talk to teachers and find out what vocabulary exactly they are using. So select high frequency vocabulary and grammar and build visually appealing resources that can be used over and over again. And I want to thank our team of teachers, Tanya, Maggie, and Mark, and the other CLB 1 and 2 teachers who provided us with very important feedback. Okay, yeah. Here is the same material and images, and they're expanded even more into a fill-in-the-blank H5P and a simple dialogue. And these are examples from Maggie. E-learning objects are flexible, versatile components that can enhance differentiated instruction to meet different learner needs, digital literacy skills, and support split-level classes. But if you're building objects for a team, it's important to show instructors how they can transform and adapt objects. For example, if you build a video in a dictation, it's important that instructors know how to remove the video so that they could use it in an easier form if they have to. Repetition is vital for the materials for CLB 1 and 2. An example of repeated components is this unit from Mark Janasek. He begins with a YouTube video, then shows a worksheet, and has 4 H5Ps so students can recycle and practice language and build to a dialogue. Video, worksheet, word find, then matching activities. And notice the progression of the matching activities. First audio and picture, then picture and word, then word and picture. The audio and picture work well for literacy learners who have high levels of oral language. Notice the white space around the unit and the easy graphic large font and easy to access files. The integrated components follow a logical scope and sequence that is easy to follow.
And Astrid, if I can share, one of the other things that Mark has pointed out with his design is that he doesn't try to use lots of different H5P activities. He uses a very consistent match the words and sounds so that learners become very familiar with the process and they're comfortable. And that way it makes it easier for learners to anticipate what the actual language learning task is going to be.
Thanks, Alison. Now we'll look at some objects for CLB 3 and 4. The LMS can be especially helpful for these levels because the students are learning and building the core vocabulary and functional patterns essential for everyday communication. Multimodal learning with word, sound, and visual really helps memory. Here is an example of a Moodle page for excuses for being absent. There is a photo, functional sentence with have to, and audio for students to listen to and repeat and practice the pronunciation with. Here is an example of another multimodal learning object for CLB 3 and 4. This is a unit on sharing photos of a family. It is a real-world task that builds important relationships in the classroom. Here is a photo, audio recording, and sample text on how to describe a photo. The unit includes a video for common prepositions for dates and times, and flashcards are used to help students practice. And it follows a very simple formula. This is a photo of, it was taken, my sister is walking, which is the present continuous tense, and you build on the present continuous tense, and an adjective to describe it. Theory and big ideas can also inspire design. For example, drawing on Bonnie Norton's work on identity theory and multiple selves, we can help students claim more powerful identities. It's not easy to be a second language learner and to be kind of just labeled in a particular way. And sometimes the students' go-to ways of describing themselves are not inspiring and not empowering, maybe. It's important to help students claim more powerful identities. This especially came up for me when I was describing chores, and I didn't want to get into some of the stereotypes. I know from teaching the stereotypes of roles and kind of the men and women thing, that the gender things that can come up in a classroom when we talk about chores. And so I came up with this concept of, we are all many people. Who are you? I am a financial organizer. I am an educator. I am a cook. I am an entertainer. And then the students describe the roles that they're playing kind of in their lives. And it just gives them kind of a new way to claim these more powerful identities. For stage 2, it's also important to design key digital tasks. Let's look at, okay, so in stage 2, it's important to use authentic resources. For example, this is a TED Talk and forum writing activity based on Haile Selassie's "Don't ask me where I'm from, ask me where I'm local." Before I forget, it's also important to let students know that they do not need to reveal private information in a class, and to if they're feeling uncomfortable about sharing private information, that they should talk to their instructors and ask for an alternate assignment. For stage 2, it's important to design key digital tasks, for example, to help students create a LinkedIn profile. Digital tools are incredibly valuable for helping newcomers demonstrate their professional competence. For example, we could even help them create videos that show their professional skills. Finally, it's important to connect stage 2 learners to practical resources that they need in their lives. Here are 3 examples, and they are shown as they display on a cell phone. The first is an ICBC video. Do you know what to do after a crash? The second is a podcast with a clinical psychologist about what mental health means. And the third is about the Health Service Locator app. These practical resources help students settle and understand how our systems work in Canada. In the chat, can you please let us know what stage 2 digital resources have worked well for you? Do you have some good websites or any resources that you use? Come on.
There must be one favorite. h5p.org.
How about what websites would you recommend that students look at? Do you have any go-to practical resources that you would usually share with your students? Okay, over to you, Alison.
All right, thanks. So I know it's interesting because I think it speaks to what Linda commented earlier, that sometimes it can be quite challenging to curate that list of go-to resources. So, you know, that's another part of innovation, is saying, okay, how can we assemble a list that's changing in really dynamic times, you know, creating bookmarks, having a shared file that people can put information into within a team. So as we come to the end of the presentation, we want to turn back to where we started in the beginning, that when we think about innovation, we're often thinking about the technology and what the technology can do. And what we want to encourage is that people think first about what the life world is for our adult learners. What are the complexities that they are facing? What are the real world tasks that they're being, you know, that they have to navigate, but also to think about what's the cognitive load related to navigating the real world task in the context that each of the different adults in the classroom, that, you know, what is their real life experience? Are they a mother at home with 3 children under the age of 6 years old? Are they somebody who's working shifts? Is this somebody who has care responsibility for an older adult and young child? Are they, you know, gigging and doing 3 different part-time jobs? You know, we need to be thinking about these things as we think about learning tasks. Again, learners are coming into the classroom with high cognitive load, and how are we going to be respectful and considerate of that in the design of learning activities? So we would encourage people to be curious about the value of e-learning and digital-based learning for adult literacy learners and lower level CLB learners. It does encourage learner autonomy, self-direction, lots of opportunity for review and repetition that can fit into the lives, the real world lives of adults, to advance both language and digital literacy skills. So as we shift now from, you know, the immediate crisis of the pandemic into endemic living, and we're thinking more about the return to in-person services, we'd encourage people not to lose sight of the value of encouraging digital literacy development alongside language development for lower level learners in the CLBs. And remember that cognitive load is an important variable to consider for the learning design. Learning in the e-rich environment it's important to address the complexity of language learning, literacy, and digital literacy. Bring attention to instructional design of e-learning materials. It does matter. The instructional methods can foster interaction, increased engagement, improvements in learner confidence in the e-learning space if we bring attention to good instructional design. Also, it's important to respect the natural desire of adult learners to creatively apply the digital language and critical thinking skills in a changing world. Adults, you know, have rich, interesting lives, and they want to be engaged in interesting activities that inspire them to continue the development of language skills and engage in local culture. We've got some contact information here for myself and Astrid, also Sandra Ailing, one of our colleagues who's worked very closely with the literacy learners herself, if you'd like to be in touch with us for any questions. And with that, I'll just stop share, and happy that we can answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I think that was a wonderful presentation. I think you really brought us through bringing the students online, what to do with them while they're there, how not to overwhelm them. So the real progress through the beginning lifetime of the student. If you're thinking about e-learning in like a synchronous classroom, have you ever, and you're thinking about cognitive load, have you ever experimented with changing some of the external sensory inputs, like maybe the lighting or the music or like the group size? Are there any suggestions that you would have that way?
Absolutely. There's all sorts of things that can be done there. Lighting is one of those things. Natural lighting is always best in the synchronous, you know, space when we're all together in the same classroom. Thinking about just even simple things like closing the door so that you're not getting in, you know, sounds that are coming down the hall. These are simple things that we forget. But the challenge is for people in the asynchronous environment, we don't know what the cognitive load is. And that's a really important piece to factor in. And we always encourage our instructors to make sure you're taking time to learn about the context for your learners. What are they dealing with? Is it a small 1-bedroom apartment and everything's happening in the common living space? So they're going to be distracted by sounds and there's children trying to do homework. Really try to understand that, because if you're sort of launching into the instructional activity, you're launching into the digital learning activity, and there's no recognition of what the cognitive load in the learning space for somebody in their home environment, it's going to make it very difficult to achieve any outcome in the actual language learning task.
Yeah, thank you. Astrid, at one point you referenced the digital support person. Can you just clarify what their role is and what they do in the class?
I think Alison mentioned that we had a digital support assistant for a term, and so the digital support assistant helped the students one-on-one. She scheduled appointments. We had somebody who could schedule appointments with the students one-on-one if they were having trouble with devices, or trouble accessing different activities in the LMS, or getting on Zoom, or kind of just working with one-on-one to help the students be able to use the tools that we had set up for them. And because she worked one-on-one with them, she could say, oh, people with iPhones have really a lot of trouble hearing the audio in these types of activities. And so like I worked quite closely with her to gather some information about what was working and not working in the LMS. And I think it's a really important piece because I mean, we don't get that feedback of what's confusing people, or just even certain websites, the audio didn't work on for some students. So it's good to know, because then I'll just take those listening exercises out of the LMS if it's got to be a factor in how we build. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yes, and it's Sally. Thank you so much, Alice and Astrid, for the very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed. I have two questions actually. My first question is, we have a literacy center of expertise at TICE, and which is funded by IRCC. It's a platform we share the resources with across Canada and sometimes maybe international. We have the lead, Jeremy and Donna here. So I was wondering, would that be possible for us to, I don't know, work with you, or do you have any interest in sharing or exchanging the resources so we can share the resources with and across Canada or even international? That's my first question. My second question is, you mentioned the learning management system. I'm just wondering what do you use? For example, at TICE we use Moodle. What do you use for your learning management system?
I'll answer, I'll do it in reverse. Moodle is the system that we're using. That's the learning management system. And the second question, we'd be delighted to do sharing and collaboration. We did a presentation for BC Teal and Jutel in the spring. And one of the things that emerged in those presentations is that there's a little bit of a gap in resources and sharing that's happening for the literacy learner and lower CLB 1-2 learner in the digital space. And we do really believe this is extremely important, that we dedicate energy to, curating resources, collecting, sharing, helping each other, because the digital shift has happened. We're not dialing back. What can we do? So Sally, yeah, we could keep a conversation going afterwards for sure.
Great, nice. And also, sorry, additional one. I'm just wondering, I really like the material you talk about, right? And it's so visual, and you talk about both visual and audio anyway. Do you need a lot of tech support in your e-learning this field? Because that can be very expensive. That is struggle at TICE, and we don't have, no funders like to fund that tech part. So we're trying to seek funding and to get some tech in, but how do you handle this, the tech support part?
That is really challenging. You mean tech support, I mean, for me as a builder, and tech support for the teachers. I mean, right now we have our own internal LMS. So it means that, you know, I'm the lead developer, so it means basically I'm the tech support for all the teachers. I'm not only the tech support, but I'm also the go-to for different materials. Where is this in the curriculum? Oh, it's here. Where is this PDF? It's here. And then, oh, the Moodle quizzes don't work. Oh, I got to figure it out. So we are lucky. We do have like our server company has a bit of tech support aligned with it, but yeah, it's not easy. And even the communication is sometimes difficult because it's hard to find the exact language for the IT ticket to know how to express what your problem is, and then they get it right or they get it wrong, and it's a lot of negotiation. Yeah, and yes, I definitely could use a lot more tech support and help. It is a challenge for sure. Yeah, and it's got to be something that's included in if we are, you know, going to blended classes. This has got to be a factor that, yeah, it's
Should.
still a challenge. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
should, but in reality, no. So because when funder talk about they want to fund, they don't think tech support is delivery part, right? And so Peter's admin part, admin is always tight. A lot of funder talk to us, we are going to support your delivery, but find the money to support your admin part is okay. But e-learning, tech is part of the delivery, but so
Mhm.
far, I don't think all the funders have a buy-in for the tech as part of delivery, hopefully in the future. So, and Astrid and Alison and Donna or myself or Jeremy, one of us going to reach out, and we really want to have a follow-up conversations with you. Thank you so much.
That sounds great. Thank you.
If there are no last questions, I'll wrap things up here. Thank you very much both for taking the time to present with us today. We really appreciate it. We have your contact information, and that will be part of the presentations and materials that we're sharing across the sector. So I'm sure some people may have some questions afterward, and they'll be able to contact you directly. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure
Thanks
to
for
meet
having us.
everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to take about 10 minutes break now, and our next presentation will happen at the top of the hour at noon. Marco Campana will be talking about how to communicate and share the good initiatives that you've been doing at your organization in e-learning. So I think it really complements a lot of what we're talking about now with building and starting at the ground floor with these resources. So we'll just take a quick break. Feel free to have a bit of a break, and we'll come back.